It's very interesting, this whole discussion and debate around what's healthy and what's not, and there's been debates for the last 30 or 40 years. The original study that suggested that saturated fat was bad came from the 1970s from a scientist called Ansel Keys. And even in his paper called the 7-Country Study, he suggested there was a possible association between saturated fat, cholesterol and heart disease. That was a correlation, but didn't really prove it. Now, since then, several studies have been done. In fact, researchers in Harvard reviewed 21 studies involving about 350,000 people over about 20 years, and they concluded there is no convincing evidence that links saturated fat with heart disease.
There are a lot of people watching this, particularly people I think maybe of an older generation who eat a lot of butter. Now, if you eat a lot of butter, that will raise your cholesterol levels. That's a fact, yes? Does that not necessarily increase your risk of heart disease or a heart attack?
Charlie, I'm very glad you asked that question. So, first of all, I'm not condoning eating lots of butter, but certainly in terms of alternatives, such as low-fat spreads and margarines, we know that butter is healthier, and there's studies that have proven that. Analysis of something called the Sydney Heart Study revealed that heart patients that replaced butter with margarine had an increased risk of cardiovascular death, despite the fact that cholesterol was lowered. Now, to go into more detail on that, we know that saturated fat, specifically from dairy or non-processed food, is healthy. And what happens to cholesterol is LDL cholesterol is traditionally thought of as a bad cholesterol. But within LDL...
The one caused by butter.
Absolutely, but within LDL cholesterol we have what we call large subparticles and small subparticles. Now, the large subparticles, which are raised by saturated fat, are not supposed to be atherogenic. They do not cause damage to the heart arteries. The small subparticles of LDL, influenced by carbohydrate and sugar, is more atherogenic or harmful. And the problem we have is a whole industry has developed promoting low-fat products that are loaded with sugar. I actually saw a patient last week who came to me and said, "Doctor, listen, I'm trying to lose weight. I'm eating these low-fat products. I've gained 20 kilograms in several months."
Catherine, you are a dietitian. People come to you for advice. Are you having palpitations listening to this?
A little bit. I think all people that work in healthcare, especially in relation to heart disease, need to use the power of evidence, not anecdote. And from the research, as Dr. Malhotra has mentioned, we know that a high total fat, a high saturated fat, lack of activity, smoking and a much higher body weight are all associated risks for cardiovascular disease. And as a dietitian, I'm more interested actually in trying to protect those 2,000 people that will have a heart attack today, in actually preventing them from developing a heart attack, and if they do, giving them the really sound evidence-based advice to make sure they don't get a second one. What Dr. Malhotra has said is quite disingenuous. Yes, there are some parts of butter and animal dairy fats which are protective against heart disease, but they're present in very tiny amounts in the actual full fat product. And in fact, what we have done as nutritionists, as dietitians, is moved on from individual substances like fat, saturated fat, carbohydrate,